Nigel Farage joins me now, Honorary President, I forget this is your title, and founder of Reform UK, and indeed my fellow GB News colleague and jungle hero. Shall we call you that, Nigel?
Well, I don't mind if you do.
How did you get on then? What did you learn most about yourself when you were out there, do you think?
My biggest fear was physically, could I get through it?
Yes.
You know, I was a lot older than the rest of the people there.
Yes.
Plus, I've got one or two injuries that I'm carrying
Indeed.
from plane crashes, car crashes, whatever. So the big fear was, would my back hold up to it? Would I get through? And what I learned was, easy really.
Yeah.
The more exercise you get, the stronger you become. So I left there after 23 nights in the jungle, no tea, no coffee, no salt, no sugar, no alcohol. Lots of exercise.
Looking lean and mean.
And, yeah, you know, fitter and stronger than I've been since I was at school. So I learned that I could do it. I also learned something else, which I never would have believed, and that was that I could totally overcome all my fears.
What was your greatest fear going in?
The Bush Tucker trials and my
you
fear
stormed through those.
Well, my fear was that I'd show fear, I'd look weak.
Yes.
And I didn't want that, and that may sound a bit of a old-fashioned, stiff upper lip approach to things. Yeah. But I managed to overcome all of that. And it was interesting because I was in there with some really fit, strong young people.
Yeah.
And then some of them were having nightmares about the trials, about the insects, the snakes. And I just breezed through it all. So no, I was really pleased with the whole thing. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I'd do it again.
And what's the reaction been now that you're out? I mean, obviously, I think that the impetus behind doing it, apart from a big fat check, let's be honest, is also the fact that you can broaden your horizons, you can appeal to a greater number of people who might not be familiar with the Brexit stuff and see you in a new light. Was that the intention?
Well, there are 2 points, really. I mean, firstly, there are lots of people out there who were 12 at the time of the referendum who are now of voting age, who don't really know much about Nigel Farage. That was useful. Secondly, a lot of people out there who have come to hate me because of what was written about me in these rags.
Yeah. Well, one of them isn't a rag.
Well,
one of them is an esteemed organ of news.
For the moment.
Yeah, quite. We'll get onto that in a minute. Yeah, thank you.
So people do form their perceptions on the basis of what other people say, and I did think this was a real opportunity. You can't, over 3.5 weeks, pretend to be any different to what you are. I mean, a number of people in the first few days have come up to me and said, look, Nigel, we never really liked you before, but actually we think you're an ordinary, normal bloke.
Yeah.
So I think it's done me a lot of good, and there's some polling out amongst 2019 Conservative voters suggesting a 20% shift in my favour.
Oh, this is it. Why are you looking at polling about your political favour when you're not?
Well, because people send it to me, and let's face it, voters are people.
Let's drill into this, please, because we need to know what you're planning.
Well, I do too.
Well, what are you planning?
Nothing at the moment.
Why not?
Well, I've just come out of, nearly a month away.
Lots of thinking time, though.
Yes, and I think this Conservative government have failed in almost every degree. I think the country is in managed decline. It feels a bit like the mid-1970s to me. I don't see any prospect of a Starmer government being any different. I think the quality of life for most people, most families, is getting a little bit worse every year in a number of ways. Yep. You can't get a GP appointment, travelling, the cost of living, the prospect of your kids ever getting a house, the population explosion that's been caused by a Westminster consensus that effectively supports legal immigration on levels we never even dreamt of. So for all of those reasons, I look at things and think, well, if I was to come back into the front line of politics, could I make a positive difference? Could I change things as I see it for the better? Against that, I enjoy working here at GB News. I've got options, perhaps more options after doing the jungle. So, one would be a very easy life. One would be back going into the sort of, helter-skelter world of politics.
You can't resist it, can you?
Well, I haven't decided. I genuinely
Let me find the Observer.
This
is an interesting headline about you. Let's see. They're saying that you want to perhaps return to the fray. Farage will help Reform make election about immigration. Former Brexit Party leader poised to return to politics, claim allies.
Well, that's just speculation.
Well, come on, nail your colours to the mast a little more. Maybe you want to tell me that you don't want to do it now, that you want to come back a bit later. Maybe you want to see what happens to the Conservative Party, what's left of it, and then reconsider.
Well, that's another option, is that you let the election go by, the inevitable happens, the Conservatives lose heavily, or perhaps they're even routed. I mean, it's not impossible that they go down to 120 seats, something like that. It could easily, it could happen. And there might be an argument that that's the right moment to get back involved. I genuinely, I'm not trying to get away from your questions. I genuinely haven't made my mind up. It is, on a political level, a big decision, but on a personal level too. It's an enormous decision.
But isn't reform gaining the momentum now? I mean...
Yes, it is. And reform is, the great thing about reform's growth is that it's solid, organic growth. It's steady. It's happening week by week, month by month. The polling that I've seen since I came out of the jungle, it's consistently now 10 to 11%. So, we're pushing up to where you think it was a decade ago.
But then that begs the question, if not now, then when? Because we've got this point of crisis for the Conservatives. I mean, Oliver Dowden on earlier, sort of insisting everything's fine, even though Rishi Sunak's approval rating has dropped to below Boris Johnson's. So it's almost like the perfect chemistry for you to come back.
Well, it is and it isn't. I mean, of course, if we had European-style elections, ironically, with proportional representation...
The only part of European politics that you were in favour of.
Well, actually, most of the world has a degree of representative democracy. It's just sort of us in America stuck with this very 19th century model. So if we had... Even if there was an element of PR in our elections, I think the answers I'd give you this morning would be a lot more positive. I'm still very bruised by 2015.
Yes.
You're getting 4 million votes in one seat.
Yes.
What the hell's the point of this?
Yes.
And maybe if you believe some of the private polling at the minute, maybe, reform, if I was heavily involved, would get between 5 and 6 million votes and 3 seats. I have to ask myself, is it worth it?
Well, it's worth it if you want to give Conservatism a bloody nose and you're so concerned about the country going to hell in a handcart that something needs to be done. No, I know.
Basically, I don't see any difference now between the Labour Party and the Conservative Party in terms of their leaderships. These are two models of big state, high tax, open-door immigration, social democracy. And ironically, with David Cameron back, I mean... You wonder now with foreign policy whether we've even left the European Union.
Do you agree with the tactic of making Reform's entire campaign solely based on immigration?
I think no, not solely. That would be wrong. I think there are 3 major issues out there at the moment. I think the population explosion and the impact on people's lives and the fact that it's not being discussed is huge. It's the biggest disconnect that exists between Westminster and the country. But equally, I think the cost of living is very real.
Yes.
I think the inflationary squeezes that people have felt are leaving a lot of people really quite scared out there at the moment. But I also think the NHS has been an absolutely central part of our lives for over 3/4 of a century. And, we know it's not perfect, it can't be perfect, but we expect basic things, such as going to see a doctor.
Yes.
And when you read that 15 million people, 15 million appointments so far in this calendar year have taken more than a month.
Yeah.
More than a month to see a GP. So we've got some major crises out there. We clearly need radical reform. We need different thinking. So, no, I think they're the 3 key areas. Let's
talk about a couple of other things that you're obviously personally invested in. The Travis Smith report into Coutts has concluded that there was no evidence of discrimination in any of the exit cases, including no evidence of a customer's account being escalated for exit or ultimately being exited due to political views or party political affiliations or other protective characteristics. What do you make of that?
Total baloney.
Right. Whitewash.
You only had to read the subject access request on me, which clearly said I did not align with the values of the
So what's going on here?
Well, Travis Smith, of course, headed up. Their emeritus boss is somebody who described Brexiteers as xenophobes and racists. I mean, this is the big club, isn't it? It's Howard Davis's mates, called in to do a review. They did say that many of the procedures that were being followed were very subjective and not being done correctly. Overall, the report's not worth a row of beans.
All right. After this, I'm going to read it. Well, I'm going to read it now, in fact. Coutts' new chief executive, Mohammed Syed, said the bank, quotes, recognise the need to improve our customer account closure processes, and those improvements are already well underway. It is clear that there are lessons to be learned. The experience of some of our customers fell short of what they should expect, and we apologise to them. Just in the interest of balance, I must read that. Let's talk about David Cameron. Did you find out that he was in post before you went to the jungle?
I think he was put into post 2 days before I went in. And even though I was sort of in a period of purdah, I did have Sky News Australia on, and I saw that Cameron had been appointed. I simply could not believe it. And true to form, here we are this morning with his first major foreign policy statement.
Yes.
And he doesn't do it from a British perspective, an independent foreign policy. He does it in conjunction with the Germans, which I thought was very interesting. It's as if the Brexit vote had never happened. But I also saw some of the wording in it.
Yeah, here it is. The Israeli government should do more to discriminate sufficiently between terrorists and civilians, ensuring its campaign is targeted on Hamas leaders and operatives. So are they saying that the Israelis are trying to kill civilians?
Well, the implication there is that civilians have been targeted. That is clumsy. It is offensive in the extreme to the Israelis, who are doing their best. And I do believe they're doing their absolute best to minimise civilian casualties. They can see that global opinion is a very, very delicate area for them. The reason I suggest to you that it's so badly worded is I guess the joint statement was written in German and then translated into English. And, with Cameron there, it's as if we're ignoring the Brexit result, we're ignoring the architect of it, and it just shows you how much trouble they're in. And it shows you also that the whole 2019 election, when they tried to become the Brexit party, they never really meant it.
No, and also you're concerned about him having any involvement at all in the governmental decision-making over the future of the Telegraph.
Well, I'm worried about this. And I know you've spent many, many years working for the Telegraph titles. I think it has quite a unique position. If you go back to the pandemic, when even some of the most conservative newspapers like The Sun and the Mail supported every measure, anyone that wasn't adhering was a cave idiot. It was really only the Telegraph during that period saying, should we really be locking down like this? Are we really getting this right? Are we happy that government's taken this amount of our liberty without any question? So the Telegraph does have, and people joke about it being the house magazine of the Conservative Party, but it does actually have a quite distinctive position. And if you ally that to the Spectator magazine, which is the longest running weekly political publication in the world, these are two very, very important titles in our media landscape. And the worry is that if you put it into hands of effectively autocratic dictators who have their own series of vested interests, that it won't be good for the independence of the newspaper. And in the middle of all of this, of course, is our friend Lord Cameron now, who has been a visiting professor at a UAE university, taking their money. And the point that I made yesterday in a piece that I wrote was that he should be nowhere near the government's decision-making process. So point one, Cameron shouldn't be there. And frankly, after the Greenshill scandal, how they could even consider him being back in government is quite beyond me. But more importantly, I think that the regulator, Ofcom, I think the Competition and Markets Authority, I think the British government themselves ought to be saying that in the interests of, media plurality in this country, this is a very bad idea.
Nigel Farage, thank you very much indeed for joining me this morning. Have a very Merry Christmas. And a Happy New Year. Thank you very much indeed. It should be pointed out that Redbird IMI, which is the group which the bid is on behalf of for the Telegraph, say that editorial impartiality will not be compromised and insist that journalistic accuracy will also be preserved, just to say in their defence.